The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to our webinar Wednesday program. This evening we have an excellent session for you. We will be discussing Brexit in higher education with Universities UK. And we're really excited today for this session on Brexit. I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves very quickly. Anne May.
I'm Anna Mayans. I'm Head of European Engagement at Universities UK International.
Hi, I'm Jenny Thacker. I'm Regional Manager for Southeast Asia and Australasia at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland.
And hi, I'm Francis McIver. I'm the High School Counsellor at the International School of Florence.
Thank you so much, everyone. So before we get started in our presentation today, just a couple notes. We will be having a time at the end of the presentation where our attendees can ask questions. There is a question box at the bottom of your dashboard that you can send us any things you're interested in. We can get your questions answered. And it's also important to note that at the end of today's session, we'll be archiving the session and we'll be putting it up on our website for all of you to see again later on. But before we get started, we're going to start with a couple polls. Just get a sense of where everyone is right now. We're going to be opening these polls. Give us a sense of where you work. We're collecting responses now. All right, just a few more to come in before I close the poll. All right, so we're closing the poll, sharing our results. So it looks like the majority of you are coming from schools. Schools are college-based, so coming from the high school side of things. All right, and just to get a sense, I'm going to hide this information, just get a sense of where everyone is based. If you can all let us know where you're based. All right. Thanks so much again, everyone. As you can see, majority are coming from the Americas, although we do have some folks who are joining us from Asia or Oceania today. Thanks so much for giving us that initial information, everyone. We're going to go back to our presentation, and I'm going to hand it off to Anne May Jansen to talk about Brexit.
Yeah, great. I get to start off with the presentations. So I work at Universities UK, Universities UK International to be exact, and Universities UK is a member organisation of over 130 UK universities. Our members are the Vice Chancellors, and International, of course, is the international or branch of Universities UK, and our department represents the universities around the world. Next slide, please. So I did a bit of thinking on how much I should tell you or what you maybe already know about Brexit, and I thought just to, for those who don't know, just really quickly talk to you about what Brexit is. So Brexit is the result of a referendum that was held in the UK on the 23rd of June 2016, in which the British people could decide whether or not they want to leave the European Union. The UK voted to leave the European Union, and at this point the UK was a member of the EU for 40 years. So what happens now is that the EU and the UK have to unpick 40 years of regulatory alignment, collaboration, EU law that has been enforced in the UK. And one of the main issues is leaving the single market. The single market operates in a way that makes the European Union operate as one country. So this involves freedom of movement of goods, capital, services, and people. 52% of the people who went to vote voted to leave, so more than 50%, and that is what was needed. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of how the division was, England voted to leave with 53.4%, Wales voted to leave with 52.5%, Northern Ireland voted to remain with 55.4%, and Scotland voted to remain with 62%. So as you can see, it was at that point and still is quite a divisive issue. The leave date is 29th of March 2019, but it doesn't end there. as I would tell you later on, there is a transition period, and that transition period will last until the 31st of December 2020. After that point, everything, the most things will change after that point, and not so much on the exit date. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about how the negotiations are going and where we are and what still needs to be done. So in December of last year, the UK government and the EU came to an agreement on the phase 1 part of the negotiations. And what does this mean? It's actually 3 things: citizen rights, the Irish border, and a financial settlement. So for the citizen rights, the objective was to make sure that the EU people living in the UK and UK people living in the EU would still maintain and have the same rights and responsibilities as they do at the moment. What they decided is that anyone who's lived in the UK for 5 years or longer is allowed to stay and apply for settled status. Those who arrive before the end of the transition period, so that is December 2020, can build those 5 years and then apply for settled status. They also agreed that the administrative procedures should be minimal and not they should be transparent and smooth and streamlined, so there shouldn't be a lot of hassle, and also no or limited cost attached to them. The other issue was the Irish border, and basically all they did at that moment for the Irish border was agree that the principles of the Good Friday Agreement were upheld. The problem is that they don't want to have a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. However, at that point they didn't really come to an agreement on how to solve that. So what basically was agreed is that unless there is a solution, Northern Ireland remains to have full regulatory cooperation with the EU. Of course, this is not something that the EU government wants, because that effectively results in a sort of a pushing back of the country border, and that is not something that the UK government really isn't in favour of. Then the third part is the financial settlement, and this is one of the things that is very important for the university sector. There was a lot of discussion about how much money the UK would have to pay the EU to get to leave, actually, and to make sure that it still was committed to the financial obligations it committed to itself to a couple of years ago. However, what they agreed on was not the amount, but just a way how to calculate it. And what was agreed as well is that the UK pays into what they call the multi-annual financial framework, which runs until December 2020. It pays into it as if it was still a full member, which means that the UK can also still participate in any European programs up to December 2020. For our sector, that means that the UK is a full participant of Horizon 2020 and Erasmus+. Now, what are these programs, for those who don't know? Erasmus+ is one of the biggest mobility schemes in the world. It started as a mobility scheme. At the moment, it's much more than just that, but it facilitates mobility between the countries who are part of Erasmus to waive, part of the agreement is that universities waive their fees and that students can go on exchange to different universities and do their Erasmus there, as they call it. So that's often like 6 months. It can be up to a year, but it's more than just higher education mobility. What you see is that you've got key action 2, for example, you've got strategic partnerships between institutions, but these don't get as much money as the higher education mobility part does. But I know in the future the Commission wants to change that and wants to put more money into the other parts of the program as well. Now, Horizon 2020 is basically just the biggest research funding pot in the world. It's 80 billion euros over 7 years, running from 2014 to 2020. And it has 3 main pillars. One is excellent science, the other is innovation, and the third one is societal challenges. And the member states and a few associated countries are allowed to compete for that funding. It's very competitive. The UK performs very, very well in Horizon 2020, and it's basically just the biggest pot of money for research that there is in the world. So what basically now happened is that because the UK is still acting as if it was a member state until 2020. The UK is part of these programs until the end, and I think that is the most important thing that came out of the financial settlement. So the other part is the transition deal, or as the UK government likes to call it, the implementation period. The transition deal was agreed to on last March, and it just basically says that there is a transition period from 29 March 2019, until 31st of December 2020. And in that period, the UK still needs to adhere to all the rules and regulations as it does as a member right now. It pays into the funding pot, which means that it gets all the rights, but also all the obligations as it were still a member. So, as I already said, people arriving before the end of the transition deal are allowed to build up their 5 years staying in the UK and then applied for settled status. During that transition deal, the UK can negotiate, sign and ratify its own trade deals, and at the same time be part of the trade deals that the EU has at the moment with other countries. Again, the Northern Ireland border wasn't solved, and they kept the agreement that to avoid a hard border, and if no other solution is there, Northern Ireland effectively will stay in the single market and the customs union. This is what they call the backstop option, but as I said, the UK government isn't very keen on this. A thing that we're really, that our sector is really keen on getting clarification on is student fees. At the moment, it is such that European students, EU students who want to study in the UK starting next academic year, so 2018-2019, will have the same fee status and access to loans as UK students have at the moment for the entire duration of their course. Scotland has already extended this to 2019-2020 starters, and we are discussing with the government very, very frequently that we would like to have that same extension done by the UK government. They've told us a few weeks now that an announcement is imminent, but we haven't had one yet. But just thinking about the fact that during the transition period, the UK and the EU kind of, adhere to the same rules as it is now, we think it's very logical to extend that for during the transition period as well. Next slide, please. So the third part actually is now the future relationship. So what happened in March as well, when they agreed on the transition deal, is that the European Council adopted guidelines, and these guidelines kind of give you the way and give you the topics and the route that still needs to be, the things that still need to be negotiated on between now and October of this year. And you broadly can, see it as three topics: the economic relationship, migration, and socioeconomic cooperation. So when it comes to the economic relationship, the EU has said, or the Council has said in its guidelines, that they want to have a balanced, ambitious free trade agreement. But they have said, and this is something that the EU has been mentioning again and again and again since the past year, that basically you can't have any cherry picking, that they are open to negotiating a free trade agreement, but that it cannot have the same benefits as a member state, and it cannot have a participation of the single market or parts of it. So when looking at the future relationship, it also talks about migration, and that there should be ambitious provisions on the movement of natural persons and non-discriminatory and full reciprocity. They also link this to issues of social security and recognition of professional qualification. The third one is socioeconomic cooperation, and here is where the programs that are important for universities are included in. So as I just mentioned, Erasmus+, Horizon 2020, but then looking at their successor programs, because these two programs last until the end of 2020, and at the start of 2021, their successor programs will start. And what basically the Council did is that they mentioned that any reference to the UK participating in them would be based on third country participation. But what they did, and we discussed this with our counterparts in Brussels, third country participation, you have different levels of participation in these programs. And as a member state at the moment, the UK has full association, full participation in all these programs. Third country participation is literally the lowest level, entry level of participation that you can have in any of these programs. And why the council put that in their guidelines is saying, okay, this is the starting point, and we can negotiate anything more than just third country participation. So that is just the starting point for negotiations for them. We don't know what will happen when. We don't have a timeline on which topics will be discussed when in the coming 6 months. But we have heard on both sides, both in the EU and both here in the UK, that what they'd like to see happen is some sort of academic collaboration chapter in the future trade or the future relationships deal, which just basically then covers the future programs of Erasmus and Horizon 2020. We don't know the detail level of that either, also because these programs won't start for quite a while still, and that means that rules that govern the association to these programs also have not been written yet. So it's very difficult to say already in advance that you'll associate to something if you don't know how what the program will look like, if you don't know what the rules of association are. But we'll probably have something that will amount to a legal basis that allows the UK to negotiate access to these programs in the future. Next slide, please. So just to show you where we are at the moment, so in March we had the transition deal. That means from March until October, the UK and the EU have 6 months to negotiate future relationship, which is not very long. And then from October to March next year, it's the implementation and ratification process. After March next year, we'll have 18 months of a transition period. And then, 1st of January 2021 is, I think, when the real effects start and when the new policies need to be in place that govern the relationship. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a feeling of the things that we're still struggling with as a university sector. We're very happy with the fact that we're in Horizon 2020 and Erasmus until the end. Of course, there is this caveat that says nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, but we're choosing the positive approach, and this is a deal, and we're clinging on to that. However, that being said, there are still things at risk if the government doesn't take action. So, for example, the reputation of the UK higher education sector, both as a research collaborator and also, reputation of universities could be weakened. Access to key funding mechanisms could be lost. UK falling further behind its competitors when it comes to outward mobility. I will show you in a moment that the UK is not very good at outward mobility. Lose existing EU talent, universities experiencing a sudden and steep decline in EU students' enrollment, and of course also universities' ability to act as a driver for local growth could be hampered. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do is just show you a couple of numbers and a couple of diagrams which kind of just show you how intertwined, how interlinked we are with the EU. So when it comes to European staff in the UK, so an average total of non-UK staff is 29% in our sector, and this goes above 47% in research-intensive universities. 17% of all academic staff are from other EU nationals, and it rises above 25% for some research-intensive universities. It translates to 35,000 EU national employed academic staff in our sector. And if you look at all staff, not just academic staff, but all staff, then it's almost 50,000 people, so 11%. Next slide, please. If you look at European students, almost 6% of all students come from other EU countries, and that was in 2016, 2017, but this is in some specialist institutions, even over 20%. In Scotland, they've got 8.8% of their students coming from other EU countries, but this is down from 9.5%, I believe. Next slide, please. So if you look at our current outward mobility, as I already said, the UK is not very good at outward mobility. Currently, we have an outward mobility percentage of around 6.5%, and the Universities UK, together with the government, set a target to increase that to 13% by 2020. And if you look at the little image, then you can see that our outward mobility to other EU countries is more than 50%. And it's interesting to see that of the 6.5% of people that go on outward mobility, actually 50% of those people go with Erasmus. So for the UK to achieve that 13% by 2020, which is only the start because they then want to, of course, increase it again, we really need the Erasmus program. So it's very important for our sector. Next slide, please. I think this one really shows the interconnectedness. I love this one. Why? It's about research, but bear with me. It just shows you how many research collaborative partners we have. So if you add up all research collaborative partners around the entire world, but not include the EU, you'd still have less partners than only our collaborative partners in the EU. So around the world, we have about 280,000 collaborative partners, and that, you know, just not the EU, but if you add up only the EU, you get more than 300,000. And I think that just shows you how interlinked we are. Next slide, please. Research funding is, of course, also very important, though it's, and I really say this, and I really mean it, it's not about the money, though the UK is very good at getting EU funding. Our universities and our vice chancellors always say it's about the non-financial added values that these networks and opportunities bring. That said, almost 15% of all of our research grants come from EU sources, and for some institutions this was over 40%, so it's a massive chunk of their resources. Then 2.5% of the entire UK sector's income came through EU research grants. And like I said, the UK has always outperformed its demographic and economic weight in applying for EU resources compared to other countries. Next slide, please. So if you look now, looking at the future, a kind of two things or two strands of work that we are working on that are important. So first, the UK-EU relationship, and then domestic policy reform. Looking at the UK-EU relationship, what do we want? Well, we want full association to the next Horizon 2020, which is Framework Programme 9 or FP9. We want full access to the Erasmus Plus Successor Programme. We want continued mutual recognition of professional qualifications. And we want, where beneficial, to have a look at continuing arrangements with the European Investment Bank. Universities have received more than 2.6 billion euros since 2006 from the EIB, so that's interesting as well. Then domestic policy reform, what we want from the government is to build an immigration system that allows our sector really to attract the best of the best with minimal barriers, as it is right now. We also want them to enhance the support for international research collaboration, provide greater support for outward mobility, because that's really something we need to work on, create a UK prosperity fund. For those who know, that will be the UK version of the European structural funds. But we would like to, of course, sit at the table and inform the government about university experiences with that program and build on the existing regulatory standards, meaning that researchers can continue to work together even though we are outside of the EU. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of an overview of how we try to get all these things, we're just one of the many organizations and interest groups and sectors who have a lot to work for in these coming years. So 3 routes: the UK, Brussels, and other member states. In the UK, we speak very regularly on policy level, but also on ministerial level with the important departments. So think of the Department for Business, but also Department for Education and the department that is responsible for exiting the EU. We are part of what is called the High Level Forum, which is led by the Ministry of Education, Samjima. In Brussels, we meet very regularly on high level, but also policy level, with people from the Commission, from the European Parliament, of course, the UK representation there, but also sector bodies, international sector bodies such as the EUA, the European University Association, and LERU and Guild, and there are many there, and we meet them regularly. And then the third route is other European member states. This is basically us just trying to strengthen the relationships that we have. If Brexit did one thing, that is, it woken us up to the need to reach out more, because in the past, the logical relationship was bilateral with Brussels, and now all of a sudden we've got 27 member states to reach out to. So we've been traveling around, reaching out to our counterparts quite a lot. We've been to Switzerland, we've been to France, we've been to the Netherlands, we've been to Italy, and we're going to Spain and Austria. We've also been to Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. And it doesn't look like that's stopping anytime soon. Next slide, please. So that's it for me, and I'm handing over to you, Francis.
Thank you very much. I have a series of questions for both of you. I'm here to represent the concerns that have been raised from the high school side, from students, parents, and other counsellors. There are lots of issues that are worrying these groups. And in the light of the growing number of alternative and cheaper options for high quality tertiary education in English, I think it's important that we try to address them. And I know that I'm asking you to gaze into crystal balls at this stage, but the fact is we as high school counsellors are already advising our grade 10 students who will be going to university in the autumn, the fall of 2019, and our grade 9 students who are going to be going to university in 2021. So these questions are already occurring, at least to their parents. So apologies for the fact that I'm asking you to answer things that are still up in the air, but what we'd like is some feel for what you think may be the case, and what we can say to students to encourage them to, or to reassure them about the value of a UK education. Now, just to start, the British government has, in the recent past at least, tried to create what it called a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. And the Prime Minister has been keen to include foreign students in net migration figures. We have recently had the example of the Windrush generation, where long-standing and legal immigrants to the UK have been harshly treated by immigration authorities. And THE recently reported that non-European university staff are being charged large sums for visas and permanent residency. Now, clearly students are not illegal immigrants, but such an attitude from the government has begun to cause some concern among European and indeed other students and indeed their parents that they will not really be welcome in the UK in the future. So I have a series of questions linked to this, and I'd be grateful for your views on how to reassure parents and students. So firstly, at present in the EU, there is mutual acceptance of qualifications. If you qualify as a doctor in the UK, you are qualified to work in other countries, languages permitting. That's one example. Continued acceptance of British degrees, particularly in the areas of law, medicine, engineering, and professional qualifications, is a huge concern for our community. Do you have any reassurance on this?
From a university point of view, I don't anticipate any rollback in existing recognitions. And I'd say that the Bologna process, which has looked at harmonisation and compatibility of qualifications, already covers countries that aren't in the EU. I think it's more than 50 countries that are involved in that. So I think the hard work's already been done on that, and I can't see that being rolled back. I'd also say that British degrees and professional licence membership is accepted worldwide outside the EU. So a lot of medical schools will have North American students or students from Southeast Asia there. So I think it's about building on the professional recognitions that we already have, and then the UK higher education being very proactive in making sure that these chartered memberships or professional qualifications continue to get recognition, or we can actually spread that to additional countries. The one thing I'll just say about students being in the net migration, universities have been campaigning that for a year. I mean, students aren't net migrants because they're there for a limited period and they leave. So we are continuing to campaign on that so that they do feel welcomed into the UK.
Just to add to that, as Jenny said, the Bologna process is intergovernmental and it's not linked to the EU. So regardless of we're in the EU or not, this should not be a problem. The recognition of professional qualification should not be a problem.
Okay, thank you. Connected to this, the community would be interested to know if there will be an impact on the cap of international students looking to go into medicine and dentistry and the associated fees for these courses. In particular, what's the presumption about EU students? Will they now fall under the 7% international quota?
That is something that we don't know. I think at the moment there's a lot of discussions with English universities about the cap being lifted and increasing the fees that way. We haven't heard those conversations in Scotland, and we're funded by NHS Scotland rather than by NHS England. So I don't think there's going to be raising them there. If they are deemed as international students legally, I think they would have to come under that cap. And there would have to be a reassessment of the recruitment of students because there is a large proportion of EU students there. But I think we have to wait until other things are decided and then react to that that kind of legislative state.
Yeah, I completely agree. On my side as well, the discussion isn't there yet. This is not something that they, at least when we speak to the government, this is not something that they've been tackling yet. So yeah, this is something they'll have to do in the future. If you just look legally, seeing that it will become third countries. So yeah.
Okay. One of the attractions of studying in places like Canada is you get 3 years to work afterwards. What do you think is going to be the situation for European students when they graduate after 2020? Will they be able to work in the UK, and for how long?
At the moment, we don't know. Again, it depends how they're seen legally. At the moment, students who are on a Tier 4 student visa can stay for 4 months after they finish their course to look for employment. There's a group of 24 universities that were involved in a pilot this year that students on at least a 12-month master's programme can stay for an additional 6 months to look for work. We'll have to respond to the legal status for it, but I think what you're seeing from universities is a lot more emphasis on employability and accessing careers earlier in their studies so they can be in the best position to then look for employment towards the end of their studies and when they graduate.
Okay, thank you. Are there any thoughts about introducing merit scholarships for students from EU countries, or the potential for increased merit scholarships for all international students, given the fact that fees may increase?
This is going to be institution specific because any scholarships for international students are down to the universities themselves. I think what we've seen in recent years is the increase of bursaries for home and EU students because they fit into different fee groups than international. I think universities that have the funds to be able to offer more scholarships will use them in a very targeted manner to try and encourage the students they want to be at their institutions. That may well be extending that to students from the EU or using them in targeted ways for different subject areas or for different nationalities. So that might happen, but it is, unfortunately, it's going to depend on each institution's priorities.
Okay. Another area of concern that's been expressed is that massive reduction in funding for research is feared. It's a perceived fear that this is going to happen. Parents worry that UK universities will not be able to attract the best staff, and that consequently this will have an impact on teaching. So again, this is making them wonder, with increased fees, is the UK as viable a destination as it used to be?
I may.
Well, a couple of things are at play in this question. First, the reduction of research funding. We do see a downturn in the funding that we get from Horizon, but that is actually more due to the uncertainty that's out there in the sector at the moment. not enough people realize that we're in this program until the end, so there is really no reason not to work with us. But the uncertainty and the language in the negotiations, they're not always very helpful, and they create more uncertainty than we as the sector can battle, unfortunately. So we're in Horizon 2020 until the end, and the aim is to be in Framework Program 9, so a successor program as well. So there shouldn't be a problem. There shouldn't be a reason. Well, yeah, there shouldn't be a reason why the UK would get less research funding. But yeah, uncertainty is a thing here. Looking at what that means for attracting people, I think again for the people that are coming the coming years, we're good. Because they can, build the 5 years here, or if they already have it, and then apply for settled status. What happens after that really depends on the migration system that the government will put in place. All we can do, and we have been doing, is really tell the government that we want to have a migration system that allows us to attract the best and the brightest, regardless where they're from. But that is something that we don't know yet. I do know they've consulted.
What's your feeling about how receptive the government is to these representations?
They are. I mean, if you look at Theresa May, she has said on various occasions that they want to attract talent, and they want to be able to continue to do that. But saying that and actually working out how the system would work and who would and would not fall under specific tiers, as they call them, is still something they're working out on. Jenny, do you have something to add, maybe?
Yeah, I think like universities are working on this, seeking collaborations with European partners. When it comes to the existing staff that we have, I know that Edinburgh has been extremely proactive in this area. In the last 12 months, we've recruited somebody who offers visa advice for staff exclusively, rather than being one of our student immigration advisors. And we're offering, we've offered a huge array of workshops and clinics. There's also been free legal advice for EU members of staff who may be concerned about their position in the country, or staff members who have EU spouses. So I think within what we can do with legislation and the migration picture, I think universities that have this strong background of EU staff, both research and support staff, are trying to do everything they can to ensure that the staff they've got who've already committed to those institutions can stay in the UK. I mean, referring back to Anne May's figures, I had a quick look at Edinburgh. 19% of our staff are from the European Union and 12% from outside of Europe. So it's in our interest to make sure that they get all the advice, legal and practical, to enable them to stay where they're working and living at the current time.
Thank you. Another trend that I have noticed is that my students are having a first choice in the UK, which is their dream school, but they or their parents are not willing to pay for what they perceive as lesser universities. Therefore, their second choices are in the Netherlands or in other parts of Europe. Now, this is probably going to get worse if the fees go up. How do you think that provincial universities in the UK can counter this perception, especially under these circumstances?
I think what we're going to see is a lot more highlighting of individual university USPs. So rather than talking about university-wide, you might get a lot more kind of fragmentation. So people, when we talk about subject rankings and specialities that they have within their portfolio. I mean, we've already seen this a little bit with when subject rankings come out, and each university has a tagline, I know, about where they are in certain fields. I think those strengths and those specialisms are really maybe going to come to the fore, because they are going to have to show that they have excellence in their portfolio of courses and experiences. So I think that is what we're going to see from institutions.
Thank you. I mean, I'm running out of time, so just one very quick question. Connected to this, some of my students have returned from admitted student stays at English universities and have commented on the lack of an international feel. This is encouraging them to make their choices elsewhere, where there is to be perceived to be a more interest in creating a truly international community. Is this a problem you've noticed? Do you have any comments on this?
I think with this, it's about the students doing a little bit of research beyond the admitted student days. It might, not saying there's hidden international populations, but looking at student societies that are on offer. Do they have national societies? Do they have cultural student societies? Are there events that are taking place that they might not have noticed on a notice board? But for example, we've got, sorry to keep going back to Edinburgh, we have a Colours of Malaysia festival each year organised by our Malaysian Student Society. All our national societies tend to have cultural and religious events. I think that shows the population of the universities and also how much they want to celebrate their background and culture and share that. So looking for student societies, maybe looking for news and events that happen at universities, rather than just wandering around and seeing who's been spotted at those events. It's kind of digging down and saying, okay, these are the things on offer. What is the student association or the student union doing? And there was a kind of event that's been started last year, which is One Day Without Us, which is when universities and other organisations are celebrating the impact of migration on their environment. And lots of universities were doing events for all of their staff. And I think it's looking into what's happening there beyond, you know, people being rolled out to talk at an open day or admitted student day. So I think it's that digging down for the students and their families to see what kind of culture is involved at that institution. What I would say as well is, when Anne May said at the start about the kind of vote for or against Brexit, the Remain vote tends to be higher in university-based towns. So I think that shows the strength of the appreciation for EU staff and students on the local community. So that's also something to look into, because it kind of reinforces the value that is spotted, rather than just, okay, let's go it alone.
Fine, thank you very much. I'll hand over to you now, Jenny.
Okay, so I just kind of wanted to highlight, sorry, if you go back to the slides about what universities are doing. There is a huge array of different things that we are trying to do to maintain the situation or show the importance of European staff and students and funding arrangements to our institutions. So we're working with Universities UK, and there's a lot of lobbying going on with other bodies to devolved governments in Cardiff and in Edinburgh, as well as to Westminster, and delegations to Brussels and other countries. I would say anecdotally, I've seen a huge increase of visits within the EU, so that might be recruitment based. Less so from Scottish institutions at the moment, because EU students are still limited to the funded places. But I've seen a lot more rest of UK institutions, English institutions, going and doing more recruitment events in the European Union over the last year or so. There's also that increase for looking for partnerships. So Edinburgh, another post that was created in the last year, was a regional director for Europe, and her job is supporting delegations and visits to our partners, our existing partners in Europe. So we've had trips to Sweden, to Belgium, to Germany, and that's really quite senior delegations of academic and principal or vice principals. We're trying to reaffirm our commitment to these partnerships in light of the uncertainty of what's happening, and showing that we're not looking to withdraw or take back from that. And that does cover those partnerships and research, and encouraging our students to take part in Erasmus as well. I've mentioned providing advice and guidance to current EU staff. I think the universities that have those large cohorts of staff are recognising the concern that that staff have, and wanting to feel that they're reassured and have every opportunity to stay in the UK and have the legal advice to enable them to cope with whatever the new arrangements are. Some universities may be looking at campuses within the EU, or creating closer partners with some of their existing institutions that they work with in the EU. And there is the sharing of information and updates as soon as we have it. So if you see on the next slide, if you go to that, thank you. Edinburgh, right on our front page, has got the university and Europe, and this is resources for staff, for students and prospective students, to show exactly what we're doing, the efforts that we're making. The importance of it being right there on the homepage, I think, says an awful lot. And the next slide that we have is just the latest news. So it's a corral. Everything that we have, we share with students and staff as soon as we have it. And I would expect to see this on other universities as well. I looked at a few of them. If you go on and type university and Brexit or university in the EU, information comes up. Sometimes it doesn't seem that we're doing a lot. We're just kind of waiting until we know what the situation is. But there's an awful lot of lobbying and connection making that is happening at institutions. And we want people from outside the university to have as much information they can. And we will share that as soon as we have it.
Thank you so much, Jenny. So now that we've concluded the initial part of our presentation today, I'd like to ask our audience, our attendees today, to see if you have any questions for our panelists. So if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and enter your questions in the question box in the dashboard, and we'll be able to relay your questions to our panelists. Just to get started, were there any questions from this morning, panelists, that you wanted to maybe bring back up again?
We were talking a little bit earlier about the assessment of fee status. I know sometimes that can seem controversial or, like, a little bit opaque. When it comes to assessing a student's fee status, it's not just based on their passport or their nationality. It's also about their residency and their relevant connection. At the moment, obviously, with the fee situation in Scotland, EU students who might be within the European Union or outside wanting to demonstrate that relevant connection, I know sometimes there can be differing decisions from different institutions. I would say having that passport isn't enough on its own. The things that we might be looking at is whether the parents are on a succession of temporary or rolling contracts. Do they still pay taxes within the European Union? Do they come back and make visits on a regular basis? So keeping things like ticket stubs is always useful. I think in Scotland, the reason that sometimes it's been so strict is because we've the funded places that we have from the Scottish Government, we can't over-recruit to them. If we do, we get fined. So I think the fees team at the various universities are trying to be as fair and as transparent as possible when making the decision to ensure that people assess the correct tuition fee status and then have that opportunity to be considered for entry. But I do know sometimes it doesn't seem very clear. I would say if any of your students are in a situation, to reach out to universities. We can't often give a fee status decision in advance of an application because things may change. But if they don't understand anything or there are any kind of quibbles or disagreement with the fee status, I'd reach out to the individual institutions that they've applied to.
We have one question that came in, and this may overlap with your previous question, but do you see fees going up for students coming from the Canada or USA?
I wouldn't, so our international fees are set separately. I wouldn't expect there to be a massive increase in response to this. I think universities need to ensure they remain competitive in their fees, and sometimes that doesn't very much seem the case depending on the programme. But I wouldn't expect things to go up in reaction to this for other international students.
No, and to add to that, it also is a matter of what kind of program you do. So if you do a program in social sciences, political sciences, these are programs that the increase of the fees won't be a massive increase. You might go from 9,000 to, for example, 12 or 13. Of course, but this is different than from very specialist programs, which you would need much infrastructure for. There, things could change a lot more. We've encountered this idea that for the whole sector, the fees are going to double, and that just won't happen. It's dependent on many factors, and one of them is as well as what kind of degree you're taking. And actually what we've been doing, because as soon as I'm in a member state in Europe, in another country, we get the fee question, and I always turn it around and say, yeah, but what you're planning to do, what are you planning to do with UK students coming your way? And this is something that they often just hadn't thought of yet. There's so much focus on what's going to happen in the UK, that member states, other countries in the EU haven't thought about what they would do with UK students coming for degrees there. So, but yeah, it hinges on, or it's dependent on a lot of factors, but it's not a unilateral doubling of fees or anything.
Thanks so much for that response. We have another question that came in. It says, can you remind us what is the last school year beginning date where the EU students will be grandfathered under the current EU regulations for the duration of their studies? Is it 2018, 2019, or in a couple of years in the future?
For Scottish universities, we've already got the commitment that EU students joining us in 2019 will have their fees paid by the Students' Awards Agency for Scotland. We're still waiting on a decision from the UK government for institutions in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And when the fee status that a student starts on and the support arrangements, that will then see them through the duration of the degree. So somebody starting a 4-year degree in 2019 in Scotland will have their fees paid for each of the subsequent years.
Excellent.
Has Scotland not also agreed to 2020 as well? Is it?
I haven't seen that. I mean, I know there has been whispers about it. The only thing I can find officially from the Scottish government is the February decision on 2019 entry.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Sorry, I have one more. Francis, would you like to go ahead?
Well, I was just saying, you were asking about questions from this morning. Somebody asked about hard Brexit, and following the at a distance the political situation in Britain, it's really hard to say exactly what's going to happen, and hard Brexit is a possibility, whatever that means. What is the worst case scenario, and how are you preparing for it?
Oh dear. So yeah, like I said this morning, a hard Brexit, you've got kind of two scenarios. The worst case scenario you just said, Francis, and that worst case scenario is negotiations just completely collapse and we crash out of everything by March 2019. But if that happens, we've got a lot more worries than just higher education and research concerns. I think then we've got a lot of troubles coming our way, generally all sectors, not just us. So to be honest, I don't see that happening. I don't think that's very likely. A hard Brexit, again, that depends on the negotiations, as does so much. But it could be, if you just look at our sector, it could, for example, result in not full access to the programs that are important to us, or no access, or not the beneficial terms for us. And I think that, potentially has a big impact on our sector when it comes to our mobility and research and staff. But I think, again, that is, to be honest, I don't think that's likely to happen. Why? Because if there is one sector that everyone agrees on, so not just in the UK, but in Brussels and in all the member states as well, if there is one sector where the UK should be very, very close to, and in all the programs, the European programs there are, it's our sector, it's the higher education and research sector. Everyone I talk to here and throughout Europe say, the UK needs to be in Horizon 2020. The UK needs to be in Erasmus and the successive programs. It is not even something they need to think about. So I think it's unlikely that, if we can't get agreement in our sector, then all the other sectors are just screwed, basically, because everyone thinks that this is a sector that does, that you really see the advantages, and even Nigel Farage likes Erasmus. I mean, come on. So I think this is something that I don't think it's very likely that we won't have access to these programs. I think that we still have got a ways to go. We're not there yet, but there is so much goodwill on both sides when it comes to these issues that I think I'm positive.
Excellent. We have one more question. How early can students apply to learn what their fee status would be?
It's what I would say is the same legislation covers all institutions in the UK, but each institution interprets it themselves, so there can be differences in assessments. We can offer advice, but we can't actually give a fee status confirmation until somebody's actually applied through UCAS, because something fundamental may change between the time they've made that inquiry and the time they actually apply. There may be different information. So that kind of binding decisions only made once they've made the application. We do have a lot of information on our website, and I would expect institutions that are welcoming a lot of international students would have this as well. For us, it's as simple as typing tuition fee status into the website and finding the guidance. But the assessment can only happen once somebody's applied. I would say if a student or their family don't agree with the fee status they've been assigned, they can usually ask for that to be reviewed. And if they don't agree with the review at Edinburgh, they can certainly ask for an appeal. But it is about showing the evidence of their relevant connection to the UK and the EU, rather than just their passport or their nationality.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your wonderful information and presentation today. Those are all the questions that we have. We are actually, now we're getting some thank yous from our audience, so they're sharing their thanks as well. Just to let everyone know, we have next month our last webinar Wednesday of the year, which will be the First Timers Guide to the International ACAC Conference, which I know everyone is looking forward to attending this summer in New Orleans at Tulane and Loyola New Orleans. So we're very excited about the conference. We hope you'll join us for the First Timers Guide to learn more about what to do at the conference. And also as a reminder, we will be posting this information, this recording, on our website as one of the benefits of your international ACAC membership. So this will be put on the website tomorrow alongside the slides as well, so you can get that information from us. Thanks again to our panelists, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.